As we begin the season of Advent and the preparation for Christmas, I thought I'd develop a sermon series around the different perspectives on Jesus that we find in the New Testament. So today we'll spend some time looking at what Paul has to say. Next week, Matthew, the week after, Luke, and then on the fourth Sunday of Advent, we'll explore together what it is John has to say. I want to do that because the nature of Jesus is not simple, but quite complicated. And a willingness to enter into that complexity will help us grow in our faith. If I can give you a few examples, maybe you'll appreciate it. The game of football really isn't one thing, but it's many. You need to have some big, strong linemen who can push other people out of the way. You need to have another type of player that can run the ball well and be kind of strong and they don't get knocked over whenever they get bumped. You need some people who are speedy, who can run, and you need someone who can both throw the ball well and is kind of smart enough to know when they ought not to throw the ball. Football is not one thing, but many. And appreciating the complexity of it makes Sunday afternoon watching the Patriots a lot more enjoyable. Even though I still fall asleep during all the games. Now, maybe you're not quite a barbarian or such a Philistine and your interests lie in other places, but music is not one note, but many. Now, no doubt you'll correct me if I'm wrong because I might not get this right. But in music, the bass sound is the foundation sound. It's what supports it all. It's the base upon which everything else is built. And then the tenor parts and the alto parts offer some interesting harmonies that bring things together, while the soprano line is the melody. Music isn't one note, but it's many. And in fact, I think you can even split each of those sections, and sometimes you can have music that's quite complicated in 8 parts, and it's enriching and beautiful. Jesus is not to be understood in one way, but many. And the many ways that we come to appreciate, in all the ways that we come to appreciate the life of Jesus, will strengthen and enrich us spiritually. So this morning I'd like to walk for a few moments through what the Apostle Paul has to say about the birth of Jesus. Unfortunately, when the Apostle Paul spells out his understanding of Jesus, he does it from a very strongly oriented male culture, using words father and son. And I know that that is excluding for some people, and it feels less than authentic. But I don't quite know how to fairly represent Paul without adopting his image. And so I apologize in advance for not finding a way to do it in a way that's more gender inclusive and sensitive. Paul is one of the very first people to ever put in print, Jesus is Son of God. And when Paul says Jesus is Son of God, he's leaning on a rich Old Testament tradition, where in the Old Testament there are times when the Son of God refers to angels, those heavenly beings that inhabit God's court, who spend eternity with God in his divine rule. At times, the phrase Son of God is used for Israel as they are adopted into God's family through the covenant. And at times, the phrase Son of God is used for the kings of Israel, probably not for them as individuals, but for them as the representatives of all of Israel. In Galatians, Paul does something quite creative and quite wonderful, but he does it as a first century rabbi, and so his logic doesn't quite line up to the way we think, so it's not quite as apparent. So if I might walk you through it. Jesus is a unique child of God, a biological son, not an adopted son. We human beings, both Jew and non-Jew, are not quite mature. We're not quite adult yet. So Paul suggests that the law is given to Israel and the elemental spirits are given to the Gentile world as kind of like a babysitter, kind of like a legal guardian, meant to protect and to instruct and to hold the immature safe until they grow up into maturity. For Paul, then, Christ, the biological son, comes into the world to the immature children of the world. And by grace and by power, we are adopted to become children of God. That as we say Abba, which is Father, but perhaps more accurately translated as Daddy, as an expression of an intimate bond, thereby the Jewish person grows beyond the law into Christ, and the Gentile grows beyond these elemental spirits. And we're not quite sure what he meant by elemental spirits, but he meant something. We grow beyond that into maturity. The biological Son of God allows us to be adopted into maturity as adult children of God. When we cry, Abba, when we profess that intimate bond with God, we are connected, redeemed, and saved. In a few moments, we'll celebrate Holy Communion. And I was wondering, could we ask you to play Abba one more time while we share Holy Communion as we express our desire and celebrate that we've been adopted into this family. You know, I coached a football player once who was really good. He started in this league where we coached, and he was about in the 4th grade. And he had a lot of potential. He was kind of small, but he ran low, and he was tough to tackle. Clearly, one of the best football players I've ever seen, and I watched him develop from 4th grade all the way up to his senior year in high school. His senior year of high school, there was even discussion that some schools were very interested in him, and one was a Division I school, quite world-renowned football college. But this football player had a little bit of a problem, and to our disappointment, we could never quite nurture him beyond this. He was good and he knew it. And he wasn't very compassionate to his teammates. When somebody was supposed to make a block for him and they missed the block, he'd get short-tempered. And he'd say things to a teammate that a teammate ought not to say to another. And whenever the coach called a different play and this player didn't get to carry the ball, well, he just wasn't quite as enthusiastic about throwing a block as he was to run the ball. All of a sudden, this Division I school lost interest in this star football player. Everybody on the coaching staff said, well, it's because he's small. He's just a little bit bigger than Danny Woodhead, for those of you who were Patriots fans. He really wasn't too small. I think they understood that a condescending attitude gets in the way, even of athletic prowess. Jesus condescends without becoming condescending. I remember I was at a church meeting once, and we had a song leader, and now, I had a misspent youth. I spent far too much time playing football and basketball, and I never quite learned how to sing when I should have. And I struggle sometimes to match the pitch, and no doubt you're aware of that if I forget to turn my microphone on. And I was excited because we were at this conference and the worship leader was a baritone. And I thought, great, I can finally match this guy's voice. And so he started to sing, and I tried to match it, and I couldn't. And I tried, and I just couldn't do it. During a break, I went up to him, and I know him, we're kind of friendly, and I said, gee, I can't quite match your voice when you're leading. How come? And he gave me this condescending look, as if to say, I have no idea why you can't do it, and I really don't care. I'm a great singer, and I guess you're not. I went back to my seat, and I was sitting with a friend of mine, and I explained to her what had just happened, and she said, you can't match his notes because he's rolling them. And I said, okay, what's that mean? It means he doesn't hit the note cleanly. He starts about a half step low, and then he builds up to the note, and then he goes a half step above. It's a technique often used in jazz. The reason you can't match his note is because by the time you get there, he's gone. And then as the next hymn came along, my friend brought her beautiful soprano voice down an octave or two, or maybe three, until I got pitch. And then I could sing. God has come to us in Jesus Christ as the Son, to set the pitch that we might sing of grace, that we might be able to recognize in God that love that can fulfill, that love that can adopt us into the joy of salvation. And may we ever sing with joy of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Amen.